When Jonathan Pierce, a billionaire tech mogul, moved into his newly renovated mansion in the quiet hills of Connecticut, he wanted peace, privacy, and perfection. The mansion had everything: glass walls, smart home systems, a private cinema, tennis courts, and even a heated indoor pool. Everything was curated, controlled, and managed by the best people money could hire. Jonathan's wife, Amelia, had passed away 6 months earlier during childbirth. Her sudden death had left a permanent scar on him, and since then he had shut out most of the world. The only reason he still went to the office was because his board insisted. Otherwise, he remained inside the house, spending long hours staring out the window or working late nights on meaningless projects. Their newborn son, Caleb, had survived, healthy and strong, but motherless. Jonathan had hired a full-time nurse, nanny, and house staff. Everything about Caleb's care was documented, regulated, and organized with clinical precision. No emotion, no chaos, no improvisation. But something unexpected began happening in that house, something that couldn't be written in a contract or measured on a spreadsheet. Her name was Rosa Thompson, 34-year-old black woman from the Bronx. She had taken the job as a maid only 2 months ago. Rosa had 2 children of her own, both grown out of diapers, and she had once worked as a caregiver for elderly clients. This was her first time working in a billionaire's house. She'd taken the job for the paycheck, but it didn't take long for her to notice the emptiness in the house, the kind of silence that felt cold. She had seen Jonathan a few times, walking silently through the halls or standing on the balcony. He barely spoke, and when he did, it was with a distant politeness. His grief hovered around him like a shadow. But Rosa didn't focus on that. What caught her attention the most was the baby. Caleb was beautiful, light-skinned like his father, with soft curls and wide eyes. But what troubled Rosa was how often he cried. Even with all the expensive formula, the hired nurse, and the robotic swing that hummed lullabies, he cried a lot. She would pass his nursery and hear the wails echoing down the marble halls. One evening, around 7 p.m., the nurse had stepped out early due to a family emergency. The other nanny was on her off day. Rosa was dusting a bookshelf near the nursery. When she heard Caleb crying again, she paused, waiting for the crying to fade. But it didn't. It grew louder, desperate, hungry. She stood still, broom in hand, torn between rules and instinct. She slowly opened the nursery door. Caleb lay in his crib, his tiny fists clenched, his cheeks flushed red, crying like he was in pain. "No." Rosa approached and gently picked him up. His body was warm, trembling. She had no milk, no bottle, nothing. But her own body, without her planning or realizing, had been responding. She was still lactating, though her youngest child had been weaned 6 months ago. Maybe it was the baby's cry or the grief in the house. She didn't know, but her breasts had begun producing milk again. Her doctor had said it might fade, but it hadn't. She looked down at Caleb. His tiny mouth moved hungrily against her shirt. She hesitated. She wasn't his mother. She wasn't even family. She could get fired. But he was hungry. In pain, alone, she sat in the rocking chair and slowly unbuttoned her shirt. Caleb latched on immediately. Within seconds, his crying faded. His body softened against hers. And Rosa, sitting there, in a billionaire's nursery, in a chair that cost more than her rent, began to hum softly. Her heart, for the first time in a long time, felt full. She hadn't seen Jonathan standing at the door. He had just returned from a late business meeting and heard Caleb's crying from the front foyer, rushed upstairs expecting to scold the absent staff. But when he reached the nursery door, he froze. There, in the dim lamplight, he saw Rosa breastfeeding his son. Her shirt was slightly unbuttoned, and the baby was curled in her arms, peaceful. Jonathan didn't say a word. Didn't even know he was there. He backed away slowly and stood in the hallway, stunned. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. Was this a violation? Was it inappropriate? Was this even allowed? But then he thought about Caleb, how often the boy cried, how even expensive formulas didn't soothe him. And then he thought about Rosa, how gently she had held the child. How naturally she rocked him, like she wasn't just a maid, but someone who cared. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Rosa expected to be fired. She even packed her small overnight bag ready to leave. Instead, Jonathan asked to speak with her in his office. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He just asked why. Rosa told the truth. She told him about the crying, the hunger, the moment she followed her instincts. She apologized. She said she understood if he needed to let her go. Jonathan sat in silence, staring out the window. After a long pause, he said, "You're the first person who has held him like a mother." Rosa felt her throat tighten. "He needs more than bottles and machines," she said quietly. "He needs love." Instead of firing her, Jonathan made a surprising decision. He gave her permission to continue nursing Caleb if she was willing. Rosa agreed, only on the condition that it be temporary until a better solution could be arranged. But days turned into weeks, and something began to shift in the house. Caleb's crying reduced. He began smiling, laughing. He reached for Rosa. When she entered the room, she played music for him, read books, and even sang him to sleep. Jonathan started noticing small things. The house didn't feel as cold. The rooms didn't echo with emptiness. There was laughter, now soft. Jonathan also began spending more time with Caleb, watching Rosa. Care for him stirred something inside him, something he thought had died with his wife. Rosa encouraged him to hold the baby, to feed him sometimes, to talk to him. Slowly, painfully, he began bonding with his son. One evening, he found himself sitting beside Rosa in the nursery, Caleb asleep in her arms. He looked at her. "How do you do it?" he asked. "Do what?" "Bring life into this place." Rosa smiled. "Love is free. You just have to give it." Their conversations grew deeper. They talked about childhoods, grief, dreams. Jonathan began to see her not just as a maid, but as a woman with wisdom, strength, and warmth. Of course, not everyone saw it that way. Word eventually got out. A former staff member who had been let go due to restructuring spoke to a gossip site. The story was sensationalized. Billionaire's maid breastfeeds his son. Is this exploitation or compassion? The internet exploded with opinions. Some called it inappropriate. Others praised it as beautiful. A few made it racial. Others called it a bond beyond social class. Reporters waited outside Jonathan's office. Board members called for damage control. PR advisors begged him to issue a statement distancing himself. But Jonathan shocked them all. He walked into a press conference and said, "On camera, I lost my wife. My son lost his mother, but we didn't lose the need for love. Rosa Thompson stepped in when we were broken. She gave my son what no money could buy. I owe her more than gratitude. Owe her the return of my humanity." The press fell silent. Support flooded in. Mothers shared similar stories. Pediatricians wrote columns explaining that wet nursing had historical roots and was not taboo. Jonathan refused to let the noise change his decision. Over time, the outrage died down. And what remained was something powerful, a new kind of family. Jonathan eventually promoted Rosa not as a maid, but as Caleb's official caregiver and maternal advisor. He offered to fund her children's education, even invited her family over for holidays. They began spending weekends together, watching movies, taking Caleb to parks, eating at the same table. Then, slowly and gently, something deeper began to bloom between Jonathan and Rosa. There was no rush, no grand declarations, just shared moments, quiet smiles, late-night talks. A year later, on Caleb's first birthday, Jonathan took Rosa's hand and said, "You saved us." And Rosa, eyes full, replied, "You let me?" They weren't a conventional family, but they were real. Built not on money or contracts, or expectations, but on love. And in a world that often divides people by class, color, or rules, this family broke the mold. They chose compassion over judgment, and that choice stunned everyone.